Hello and good evening. Thank all of you for joining us tonight. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I'd like to welcome all of you to a live broadcast from LaRouche PAC Television of an international address by Lyndon LaRouche. The context of this broadcast tonight comes in the wake of the dramatic events that we saw last weekend unfold at the United Russia Party convention with Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev, who announced their joint candidacy, with Vladimir Putin announcing that he will be standing for re-election as the president of Russia. This was immediately followed by the public humiliation of now former finance minister Alexei Kudrin by the now current president Dmitry Medvedev. These events present to us an historic opportunity, an opportunity to open a new chapter in human history, a chapter which will be determined by the leadership worldwide of a great Pacific alliance, Russia, China, and a post-Obama United States. Now, in order to seize this opportunity, patriots in the United States will have to rise to the occasion and have the responsibility to reciprocate the bold and courageous actions which we saw exhibited by our friends in Russia last weekend. Tonight we have a special international address by Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Mr. LaRouche will present an opening statement, which will be followed by a short discussion in which we'll take a few questions from members of the audience we have gathered here. So without further ado, I'm proud to present to you Mr. Lyndon LaRouche.
Thank you. Well, there's going to be some sad news in this tonight. There also is, as compensation, the opportunity for a great step forward in terms of the conditions of humanity. Now, there are about 3 sections to what I have to say today. There's a short interpretation of this. But one has to recognize that we have entered into the most dangerous period in known history of civilization. We are at the point of a general breakdown crisis of the entirety of the transatlantic region, especially the North Transatlantic region, and which the only alternative is to shift the center of attention from the disaster in the transatlantic region to the optimism we can hope for from what in the Trans-Pacific region. That's generally the nature of the situation. The situation otherwise is this. There is a general breakdown process underway now. We are at nearly the terminal end of the existence of the order of transatlantic world as we've known it up to now. Exactly what hour or even what day this thing is going to collapse, we don't know. But the collapse is now, in its present form, barring a miracle, inevitable. The first condition to be considered is the following. Since the transatlantic region is in a breakdown crisis, that includes the United States, implicitly Canada, and Western Europe, and so forth, then we have to look at the alternative for organizing a recovery, which is in the Pacific region. The condition for the measures which can be taken to overcome this crisis is the immediate removal of President Barack Obama from office. Because if President Barack Obama remains president, his presence will prevent the taking of those kinds of actions which could save civilization from a deadly, most deadly, new dark age. A dark age which would explode in the transatlantic region and then would spill over into the trans-Pacific region. That's the general conditions. Now, in order to save civilization, we start with our role in the United States. It's already mentioned the role of Russia and things connected to that. But the solution starts in the United States because Western Europe is in a hopeless situation. There is no nationality, there is no national sovereignty in terms of Europe today. That is, in terms of Western and Central Europe today. There is no option for a recovery to be initiated in the transatlantic region, that is, in the European sector, because the nations of Europe, or what had been nations of Europe, no longer exist as sovereign nation states. They have no sovereignty with which to equip themselves. The British Empire, which is the owner of these nations, in fact, is, of course, an absolute disaster. So therefore, we have to turn our attention to the Trans-Pacific region, where it's also threatened, but it is not in the stage of disaster that the transatlantic region, and including the United States otherwise, is involved in. So therefore, what that means that we're going to look forward to, with the help of this development in Russia recently, we're going to go to the Trans-Pacific region, which includes, of course, our own west coast, and includes the coast of Asia as well. And we're going to go there where they are not yet bankrupt, where they still have some semblance of sovereignty, as Russia has secured its own sovereignty with the actions of the past week. And we are going to depend upon our relationship on the Pacific side, Canada, the United States, and so forth, for a Trans-Pacific development program, where these parts of the world are still somewhat organized. They function. They're not totally under British domination. And therefore, we can expect the program we might launch on a global scale will have its first prominent attention in the Trans-Pacific region. Now, in order to describe what we have to do in the United States to do our part in this global recovery prospect, the first thing we have to do, we have to fire the President of the United States. That does not mean necessarily that he's going to leave the presidency entirely at once. It does mean that he's going to be under conditions under which he is being impeached or thrown out of office. Now, the impeachment or throwing out of office of a President of the United States may take a little bit of time. First, you notify him that he's in trouble. You may impeach him at that point. You may take other actions which could lead to his ouster. But once we decide that this president is going to be removed from office, which his powers as president are in suspension, we then are ready to go with several actions from the United States, which will be relevant to the recovery we need. The first thing we have to do, after putting this president out of power, that is, putting him in such a position where he no longer has either the power to make things happen, at least immediately, and in which he is no longer respected. He's not much respected anyway, but we can neutralize him so he's no longer a really efficient factor in shaping the policies of the United States. At that point, the first thing we have to do is Glass-Steagall. We have to reenact the Franklin Roosevelt Glass-Steagall program. And there is now a great deal of support for that, and it's spreading rapidly throughout the United States. And it's attracting attention also in Europe, notably. European nations now realize that Glass-Steagall is necessary for them. And the reason they do that, recognize that, is because the European nations have no sovereignty. That is, the Western and Central European nations no longer have sovereignty. They are merely puppets and auxiliaries of the British system. So therefore, what we have to do is act from the United States, having once first put Obama effectively out of control of the presidency, by putting him under suspension either because of charges which he's guilty of, for expulsion, for being thrown into prison perhaps, and because he's incompetent in other ways. Now, therefore, he's also mentally insane. That is a fair thing to say. So he should be out. Without respect for him, no real influence anymore. At that point, Glass-Steagall can come through. However, as long as this president is president with his full control of his powers, unless he commits suicide or does something foolish like that, it will be able probably to prevent Glass-Steagall from being enacted effectively. So therefore, the first condition for saving the United States, in particular, from early destruction. Now, let me emphasize what I mean by destruction. I mean that the hyperinflation is so bad, has reached such a point, that at almost any time, money can virtually cease to exist, which will mean a condition in which people in the United States, for example, will start dying in large numbers, because that's what the situation is. So we must have him out of office or effectively neutralized. And we must have the Glass-Steagall then enacted. Under those conditions, the federal government will be able to prevent mass death from breaking out inside the United States. And we can be on the first step of a road toward recovery. Without these preconditions, that's not possible. Now, once we've enacted Glass-Steagall, you'll find that the total money listed as being potentially money or assets or whatever in the United States is going to be not worth much. Most of the claims on money in the United States are presently actually worthless. The only thing is they have not been officially declared worthless. We're living on hyperinflation. A hyperinflation which is about the same kind of thing that Germany in 1923 experienced in October and November of that year. We're in that situation now. That's our area. So we're just a short distance, a short bit of time away from a general breakdown crisis in which Americans begin dying of starvation en masse. So we must do that. Now, what do we do next? Now we've got the control of the economy, at least nominally. But we don't have much control because there's not much value there. We don't have enough credit available, even after enacting Glass-Steagall, in order to save the population of the United States. So therefore, what do we have to do? We have to do something which was the effective intention of the Secretary of Treasury when the Constitution was enacted. What we do is we go to a credit system, not a monetary system, not a money system. In other words, the federal government now says we, the federal government, pledge ourselves to go into debt to provide assets under which the economy of the United States can function and the people survive. That will work. Now, this means that in order to keep this credit we are creating valuable so that it can do us some good, it means we've got to do some big investing. We've got to launch a long-term program of physical investments primarily, as well as health care and the care for our citizens generally. But the basic thing is to increase our productivity under a credit system with large projects, especially large projects, a very high rate of gain in technology and capital intensity. It means we're going to have to cancel all that legislation which since Teddy Roosevelt did to prevent the development of the western lands of the United States. We're going to cancel all the green policies. We have to cancel the green policies. Reasonable things against poison and so forth, that's fine. But we're going to cancel the entire green program. And we must do it by one single act of Congress immediately, because otherwise we cannot save the people of the United States. It's green or die. Green goes or die. So therefore we're going to have to invest in some very large high-gain policies in investments. We're going to, keystone is we're going to launch NWAPA. Now NWAPA is a long-term program because some of the things will be done after I'm dead. But they have to be done and they have to be started now. So on that basis, we're going to have a recovery program, which is effectively a full employment recovery program. But more than just recovery, it's going to be generally high technology and capital intensive, as NWAPA typifies that. Now, this then leads us to what's the solution. I said earlier, intention is that China, Russia, and other countries of Asia, or the Asian are going to begin cooperating as Russia and China are doing, and India will join in doing that. Therefore, we will immediately enter into a trans-Pacific orientation as opposed to the present transatlantic orientation. That is, the U.S. economy in recovery under these conditions will shift the center of its action to the trans-Pacific region rather than the present transatlantic region. Why? Because Europe, continental Europe, is non-functional. That is, the western part and central part of continental Europe is no longer functional. We're going to try to save it, we're going to work to save it, but it cannot really carry its own weight right now. Therefore, we're going to live on the basis of high-powered investments in the trans-Pacific region, from the Arctic Ocean on down. The key thing on our side, of the western side, and the central states side in the United States, will be NWAPA. NWAPA will be the driver which goes together with giant projects which are now underway in terms of Russia in the Pacific coast area and adjoining area of Russia. It means that China has got major projects, and China and Russia have cooperation because Siberia has vast assets which are being developed now under current Russian policy, under former President Putin and current President Medvedev. Those projects are going to develop the resources and the Pacific basin of Russia. Russia, in turn, has a partner to the south, China. China has a large population where northern Russia has a very relatively small, or not a dense population. Siberia has resources, physical resources. China has people. Russia has a commitment to advanced technology. China now has a commitment to advanced technology. So therefore, the United States and Canada, cooperating with Russia and China and other nations, Japan will be happily jumping in on this, Korea will be happily jumping in on this, nations of South Asia will be happily jumping in on this, India will join on this. So therefore we will have a large degree of activity, of high technology, capital intensive activity, as a characteristic in the Trans-Pacific region. During this period we will then at the same time move to restore Western Europe to a system of sovereign nation states, no more of the present policy of the British Empire. In fact, we were very happy to see the British Empire disappear entirely. The English can live, the Irish can have a right to live finally. But the point is that Europe is going to be in a recovery mode, and it must regain its national sovereignties. The present system which has destroyed Europe, continental Europe, or at least the western and central part, that has to be rebuilt. And it has to be rebuilt by help from us and others. And because the market for German goods and for other goods from Europe still exists potentially in terms of areas like India, China, and so forth. So we will have a recovery program in the transatlantic region, but it will be very slow relative to what we will get quickly in the Trans-Pacific region. That's our orientation. Now, this means, of course, that high technology projects are going to have to take over the United States. We're going to be the center, together with our friends in Asia, of a drive for this. We're going to operate on the basis of a credit system, not a monetary system, not just a money system, but a credit system. That's not well understood by most people, but that's fine. But this is the only option that we have, and it's a real option. With the United States under a decent president and decent leadership could actually spark this. Russia is now fully committed to moving in that direction. China is committed to moving in that direction. Other parts of Asia are ready to move in that connection. The Trans-Pacific effort is going to be successful. The completion of the election process in Russia will make this clear. The entry of India, which may be initially reluctant to buck the British entirely, India will come in too. So that therefore we will have a massive driver in the greatest concentration of population in the Pacific area, Trans-Pacific area. And that's going to be the hope for the future. So now we are shifted then from a transatlantic focus, which has been our experience ever since the beginning of modern European civilization. We're now shifting to the emphasis on a trans-Pacific region. And we're going to start developing some very high technology developments. We're not going to have extreme capital intensity, which I'll explain. We need extreme capital intensity. Small is not good. Big is better. High technology makes it good. Capital intensity makes it better. And that's the way we're going to go. Also, we're going to go into space. Obama's gone, space is back. NASA is back, and similar kinds of programs are back. We need them. We need the technology. We need advanced technologies of a type which are now virtually banned by this present U.S. government. We cannot make it without those technologies. So we're going to do it. So NWAPA then becomes the driver from the United States side of the development of the United States as it had never been developed up to this time before, as was intended by John F. Kennedy before he was slaughtered, before he was murdered. The murdering of Kennedy is what killed NWAPA. It was ready to go. Kennedy had signed on to it. And only the assassination of John F. Kennedy stopped NWAPA. So as a revenge for the murderers of John F. Kennedy, we want NWAPA fully back. And that is going to be the driver, which is going to play a key role from the Arctic throughout the Pacific region of a transformation of the economic character of this planet. And on the basis of this, we're going into space as space has never been considered before. And John F. Kennedy would be happy. He'd be happy with the Pacific Basin program. He'd be happy with NWAPA. He would be happy with defeating the people who murdered him. And we're going to do that. We're going to keep our honor. We also have another one, a challenge. As one astronaut said recently in a meeting, we cannot confine the human being's population to Earth alone. We must develop mankind's occupation of space. Mankind must take over more and more influence over the galaxy within which we live. And these are the kinds of projects which are required to bestir the imagination and hope of the people of the United States. Everything I've said here, I know well, is perfectly feasible. The problem is we don't have much in the way of guts recently in our United States or in Europe. The guts to undertake these kinds of projects which are perfectly feasible. Projects which have been intended, as is typified by the case of NWAPA. NWAPA was clearly intended. It was clearly designed to be implemented at the time that Kennedy was murdered, was assassinated. And he was assassinated because the British wanted a war in Indochina, a decade of war in Indochina. And the United States and the world has never retreated from these meaningless wars, these bloody, meaningless wars, which are typified by the Indochina War, and the wars that have followed and followed and followed and followed since that time. So therefore, we have to go along with a galactic view. For many reasons, including our basement organization is well aware of some of the features of this. This is why it's important for us to move in on the galaxy and to begin to take a hand in shaping the future destiny of the galaxy, at least on the fringes of it to start with. We've got to do something. I'm not suggesting putting a pilot station in the galaxy someplace. We're in the galaxy already anyway. But we're going to look at some of our neighbors in the galaxy and see which ones are susceptible for our encroachment, and that soon. So that's our challenge. We have the opportunity. We have the necessity. We shift immediately with the help of our allies in Russia, China, and we know India will come in. We know that Japan will be happy to come in. We know that Korea will be happy to come in. We know that Indochina will be happy to come in. We know that Australia will be looking. Who are the British, will the Australians will say. We don't need them anymore. And with that organization and that approach, we have the possibility before us of a future for mankind. It's a future for us to lead. And what has just happened this past Saturday with the conference in Russia, the ice was broken. A new era has entered. And you're going to find out soon, if we don't all go to hell in the meantime, when we get this thing going, we're going to find out that the United States, Russia, China, and also India will be the leading nations which will define the driver for the transformation of this planet from the threat of doom to a generous recovery and to a great future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. So as I said, we have time for a brief discussion period. We'll be taking questions from the live audience that we have gathered here. So let me ask Michael Kirsch to come up to the podium first.
Thank you, Lynn. We have a series of questions for you, but I'd like to start with one. You started out discussing the fact that we have to move toward a Pacific orientation because we see where the physical wealth is being built on the planet, and the question of loss of the currency value of the United States due to the hyperinflation that's going on. If we were to cut that in state Glass-Steagall, we'd be sitting there with a lot less than we need. Now, one thing you said that I think some people might have missed is the word commitment. You use a number of times to describe a different government than our own. And the question of the relationship between the commitment of a government and the creation of physical wealth and the creation of value of the currency, what I'd like you to elaborate on is why is it in the case and how does it work that the process of building physical wealth is the basis for a restoration of our credit as a currency?
Well, credit, you know, is a funny thing because you're talking about credit. You're not talking about peanuts. You're talking about a investment by more than one generation. All of the great projects which we need now, as in the past too, are projects which require a multi-generational investment. They require the incurrence of debt, a debt which spans generations. And one of the great things that we have to master in this respect is what is the nature of human beings, or what should be the recognized nature of human beings and their adopted purpose in living. Now we think, well, we die and that's it. That's a popular view. There's some mystical views which really shouldn't be popular because they don't make any sense. But what is the thing that can be done which bridges life from one life through death to another life? What is that connection? So mankind, after all, is not simply another animal which dies in its time, as every animal does. Mankind is something different. Mankind has something that no animal has: the power of creativity, the power of introducing a higher state of organization by the human will, and no species on this planet otherwise has ever been able to do that. Therefore, we do not simply die, though that often happens to us. The people go on from one life to another life following, and they don't see much of a connection between the two. The point is to have a purpose in life which transcends death. And this is only possible through the creative powers of mind of the human individual. And therefore, this leads to what? It leads to something that no animal knows. Credit. Credit. Because the things we invest in are the things that we create. Things which transcend the death of people, of individuals. The investment of a life in a transition to a new life, which is a continuation of the old, even though the persons who were succeeding one another have died. So therefore, the idea of credit is not a physical or financial conception. The idea of credit, first of all, is human. And no species known to us, other than human beings, know what credit is. It doesn't exist for anything except human beings, to our knowledge. Therefore, we design a monetary system or a financial system is based on a system of credit, which means the development of one individual who transmits something which is of use to a second generation. And this is not a process of continuation, it's a process of development. And the unit of development is what we should call credit. Now, this was something that has been understood for a long time by some people. But this system, this concept of credit, is unique as a worked out system to the United States. This was the Massachusetts Bay Colony, for example, was a system of credit. The system authored in the founding of our Constitution was a system of credit. The system of credit is not a monetary system, it's not a cash collection. The system of credit is the transition and the continuation of the activity of a life through the transmission of a continuation of an effort, an intended effort, to a second life and a life beyond that. Credit is history. Credit is human history. And what we're going to require now, in order to get out of this mess which has been created for us in the United States and other places, we're going to have to cancel this idea of money the way it's conceived now. It's conceived as animals who eat or whatever they do and then die. But human activity, a human system, economic system, is not animals dying. A human credit system is the advancement of mankind, the powers of mankind, the accomplishments of mankind from generation to generation. And what the connection among the living and the living that follow them and the living that follow them is credit. That's the true meaning of credit, is that we pledge something to the future. We praise and protect something which was given to us from the past for the future. And the idea of an economic system, a true economic system, a physical economic system, is that, the system of credit. But the content of credit is not cash. The content is not money. The content is not notes and bills of exchange. The content is human creativity. From generation to generation, people die, but humanity must never die. And once we have that concept, we've got it right.
Thank you. Okay, for our next question, Megan Roulard, why don't you come up to the podium?
Yes, Lynn. On the subject of the U.S. recovery in the context of this new Trans-Pacific alliance and orientation, I wondered if you could say more about the NWAPA project, which also coheres with what is coming out of Russia with Putin, not only as a project for the United States, but a project representing the colonization of the Arctic, which is also our interaction with cosmic radiation, relates to this this question of the prospect of man in the galaxy, mastering this domain. I wonder if you could say more about NWAPA from that standpoint.
Well, see, mankind does something that no animal can do. Animals, in a sense, seem to do it, but not by intention, but by accident, by the way they're designed. that mankind actually creates Earth. We take this thing called Earth and we change it. And it's again the same thing as the principle of credit. That our existence is the creation of a transformed Earth. For example, this is exactly what we're facing now. Nawap is a perfect example of this. We're building a change in the weather with water. We are now managing the water. At the same time, we're building the works which transform the surface of the earth in its character. And therefore, we take control of our destiny. And it takes generation to generation to generation. Credit to credit to credit to credit. And this process is the legacy, or should be the legacy, of every human being. They never really die, in the sense they may die mortally, but the meaning of their existence never dies. The meaning of their having contributed to mankind never dies. They become implicitly immortal in what they contribute to the future of the universe. We have to think in these terms. We've got to get rid of this idea of money as being something filthy. I suppose it does get pretty dirty now and then, especially when it passes through the hands of our presidents. But nonetheless, we have to understand that all economic values have to be seen as specifically human values, as tied to the proper function of the creative powers of the human being, powers that we don't know of as existing in any other species familiar to us. And therefore we have to look at all these things, not in terms of the cash nexus, but in the terms of a system of credit. And that's the way to look at this thing.
Michael, do you have a follow-up question?
Thank you. And something that I'd like you to elaborate on more is something you just touched on here, is the question of energy flux density and economy. And it's something that you discussed over the years, and I think hopefully we're now in a position to demonstrate this over a period of time in the coming years and show how this works. But we've recently demonstrated this on our basement page on this website, of the question of all preceding evolutionary periods of the Earth. You've seen from the Silurian to the Devonian with the colonization of land by plants, to the Mesozoic to the Tertiary period with the transition from dinosaurs to mammals, a continuous increase of work accomplished by the biosphere. And we've seen that this is what the Earth has done continuously over time, which should give us a new metric for why human beings should do the same. But if you could elaborate on that as a new metric for economy.
Yes. Delighted to do so. We have to settle some accounts with some evil fellows who've been lying to people for a long period of time. The characteristic of life itself, and also of human life in particular, is that which is lied about by the greenies, by the so-called environmentalists. All environmentalists are by nature liars and perverts. Why? Because contrary to the great lie, nature is not fixed, nor is there a second law of thermodynamics, except in the minds of idiots. The record shows, for particularly over 500 million years, of our study of life within this galaxy, under the influence of this galaxy. And what has happened? There's constantly an increase. There is not a decrease. There's not a depletion. There is no such thing as zero growth. There's positive growth. The universe, as we know it, and especially life, is characterized by positive growth. Why are some animals become extinct? Because the standard for existence of animal life is increased. That the species which have not improved their energy flux density become extinct, like the dinosaurs. And the second law of thermodynamics is one big lie based on the oligarchical system. There's no truth to this idea of that kind of system. It's not true. Therefore, mankind's existence is based on the fact that mankind is the only species of which we know which has the willful power to increase the energy flux density of life as a whole on our planet Earth and beyond. And that's the meaning of this process. The universe is moving upward and leaving the greenies behind. And we have to understand that this process, that life, well, the work of Vanatsky and others points in this direction. There are many indications that point in this direction. But the nature of the thing is that an increase in energy flux density throughout the planet, among the species that inhabit the planet, is the precondition for the survival of any species. Any species that does not rise to a higher level, to progress, to greater energy flux density. There's an explanation for this which is rather important to consider. What's the problem? Why do people say that we're using up energy? Why do they say we have these kinds of problems? Well, because the planet is polluted by a certain kind of human being who believes that there are too many human beings on this planet, or that mankind is consuming and producing too much power on this planet. They want to stay back to a more modest population, like the British now have ordered. The British royal family has demanded that the human population of the planet be reduced from the order of magnitude of, 5 billion population down to 1 or less. This is the official policy of the British Empire. It's a policy of mass murder. It also is a policy which, if it carried out, means that the human species will become extinct by the virtue of this policy. And the fact of the matter is that mankind's ability to exist as a species, on the one hand, is the fact that mankind is able to increase the energy flux density which we're able to apply to the existence of human beings on this planet. And those who have a contrary view are called the oligarchical system. The oligarchical system is a bunch of fruitcakes, to use the term politely, who believe that mankind is divided into two groups of people. A small but honorable group of people who believe that there are too many of the lower folk, and we have to reduce and keep down the number of lower class folk in order that the degenerates who call themselves oligarchs will be able to enjoy themselves more freely. That's what Bertrand Russell said. If we could kill enough people in each generation, people could procreate quite freely because they were going to die conveniently after having the little pleasures. And so the issue here is that the destiny of humanity, as the destiny of any species, depends upon, as has been demonstrated by 500 million years of living processes and investigation, depends upon increasing the energy flux density per capita. It means increasing the size of the human population. Without those measures, there is no future. And the oligarchs will have to become extinct if they continue their policies. Well, if they wish to become extinct, that's their business. But they should not meddle in our bedroom.
Okay, we have time for one more question, so let me ask Megan to come up and ask a follow-up question.
Lynn, I'd like to address this trans-Pacific orientation from the highest standpoint, which you addressed in what you started with, which is the galactic crisis, which we've elaborated on the LPAC website. Given this known threat, we have a looming threat of an extinction, the galactic weather, extreme weather which we've faced. And I do think, I'd like you to say more, that this trans-Pacific orientation bodes well, or is a much improved situation for mankind with respect to that much improved with respect to what we face in the United States currently under Obama. You have in Russia and China, for example, a commitment to put man back in space, manned space exploration. You have the Spectre-R telescope, 1,000 times the resolution of the Hubble. The Chinese just launched an unmanned space station. You also have a serious commitment, for example, to serious work, scientific work on earthquake precursor research. So that's what the Trans-Pacific Alliance represents with respect to this crisis. I think people, though, need to get the counterpoint between that and the prospect for mankind in the galaxy under that system, contrary to what we have here in the United States with Obama still.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Well, the conditions, as we've studied, and our basement team has done over the past year or so, a good deal of study of this question. As we studied the history of life in the recent 500 million years, for example, within the range of this galaxy, not so much the galaxy as a whole, but implicitly the galaxy as a whole, and what we have been studying, we see, first of all, the progress, the evolution of living processes. And we have some intimation of processes which were pre-living. But what we know of living processes, there's a constant evolution of species, from the simplest form of proto-life to unicell life and so forth, all the way up. And we see the evolution of life in the planet as rising in terms of energy flux density. And we find this is natural. We didn't decide on this. The universe itself, the galaxy, decided to do this. And the existence of the galactic system and the existence of life on Earth and so forth all depend upon the continuation of this increase of energy flux density, which affects all kinds of things. It affects life, non-life, it affects human beings and so forth, living species. And that's what we depend upon. So we see that the universe is creative in that sense. And this, of course, is quite an interesting theological point, that the universe itself is a product of pure creativity. And we have to look at ourselves and look at this human species in completely different terms. We have to look at in terms of that creativity per se is the idea of creator. And the disposition of the creator is creativity. We don't know exactly what this means in total because it's way beyond our experience as a living human species. But we see the universe out there as a very complicated thing as far as we can get a hold of it. And we realize the one characteristic of this universe is creativity per se. The idea of a principle of a creator, a constant process of creation. And we have the pleasure of having reached the point that we are willfully creative, as no other species known to us has been. And that we express the principle of the creator in the expression known as mankind. The ability to carry creation willfully into higher levels. We feel a great optimism because we know this thing called creativity, which we experience in human behavior, is the principle that drives the universe. And therefore we as human beings can feel the utmost confidence, the utmost pleasure and pride in the fact that we are creative, a creative species, a willfully creative species, which epitome of what the universe is as we otherwise know it. The universe is creativity per se. We express that principle of creativity as human beings. And we have a sense that humanity is struck upon a principle which is beyond our imagination. But no being beyond our imagination is nonetheless true. It cannot be doubted. And therefore we have an affinity toward our universe in that sense. I think that this sense of the affinity of mankind to mankind's universe is the ultimate morality. It's the highest thing we know so far.
Thank you very much. So that brings a conclusion to our webcast event. I think everybody shared the strong intimation of the future that we had to have ahead of us if we create it. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and stay tuned to LaRouche Pack TV.